A single invisible flake of skin can be the absolute difference between a teenager spending their life in prison or walking completely free.
Right. It is literally that small.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are grabbing a stack of sources that pull back the curtain on how modern justice actually works. We've got local broadcasts from WJLA and FOX5 DC, some national reporting from PBS, and a really dense forensic science journal tracking the latest in DNA recovery.
Yeah, and we are also looking at a massive Fordham Law Review piece that breaks down the psychology of police deception.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to track a single local tragedy and watch how it sets off this chain reaction across the entire criminal justice system.
We're exploring that collision between the microscopic, rapidly evolving science of touch DNA and the deeply controversial psychological minefield of interrogating teenagers.
And the anchor for everything we are going to discuss today happens on June 30th, 2025. This is near the intersection of 7th and M Streets Northwest in Washington, D.C.
Right in the middle of the city.
Yeah. The victim is a 21-year-old named Eric Tarpinian-Jachym. He was a student at UMass Amherst, and he was spending his summer as a congressional intern for Representative Ron Estes.
And he was just standing on the street.
Literally just standing there, a completely innocent bystander caught up in an unbelievable amount of violence.
Yeah. According to the police reports, a stolen vehicle screeched to a halt right near the intersection. Multiple suspects erupted from the car and just unleashed a barrage of gunfire.
They fired dozens of rounds.
Dozens. The intended targets were two young men on bicycles who the shooter suspected belonged to a rival neighborhood group.
But the shooters missed their targets.
Right.
Instead, those stray bullets tore through the crowd. They hit a woman, they hit a 16-year-old boy, and 4 of those rounds struck Eric, killing him.
It's just devastating. Detectives eventually tracked down 3 teenage suspects, and they charged all of them as adults.
Okay, so who are the suspects?
You have 2 17-year-olds, Jailen Lucas and Kelvin Jr. Then you have the third suspect, who is Jailen's 18-year-old brother, Naquan Lucas.
And the sheer level of violence surrounding Naquan actually escalated from there, right?
It did. It really did. When authorities finally located him in Germantown, Maryland, they charged him with Eric's murder. But they also charged him with the murder of his own 17-year-old girlfriend, Zoe Kelly.
Wow. And that happened just days later, right? On July 4th?
Yeah. The reports, state police found her body stuffed inside a storage container in a closet in Northeast D.C.
That is horrifying.
It paints a picture of suspects capable of immense, rapid-fire violence.
Now, because this shooting happened blocks from the Capitol and because the victim was a congressional intern, this wasn't just a local tragedy. It instantly became a political football.
Oh, absolutely.
You had President Donald Trump and U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro holding press conferences. They pointed to this murder as a catastrophic failure of local D.C. policies. They basically argued the local system coddled juvenile criminals, and they used the case to justify a federal law enforcement surge into the city.
Right. And meanwhile, local leaders like D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser pushed back. She emphasized the core issue was the unacceptable availability of guns.
And then the defense attorneys jumped into the fray too, claiming their teenage clients were victims of highly biased witness identifications and circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, they really attacked the narrative.
Now, to be explicitly clear to you listening, we are not taking a political side here. We are completely impartial.
Exactly.
Our goal is just to show you how a local tragedy becomes a massive national talking point based on our sources. But it makes me wonder, for the detectives on the ground, that intense political noise just translates into immense, crushing pressure.
Oh, yeah. The heat is on.
Right. You have the President of the United States and the national media demanding a closed case. So does that environmental pressure force investigators to rely on perfectly undeniable science to make an arrest, or does it invite rushed conclusions just to get a suspect in handcuffs?
Well, the courtroom usually reveals the answer to that. Fast forward to the December 16, 2025 detention hearing before D.C. Superior Court Judge Danya Dason.
Okay, what happened there?
The defense attorneys attacked the core of the investigation. They highlighted a glaring lack of concrete DNA and a complete lack of fingerprints.
Wait, no DNA at all?
Practically none. They essentially argued the prosecution built a massive, high-profile case on shaky cell phone GPS data and unreliable video, completely lacking an undeniable biological link.
Wow.
and they specifically targeted how the police handled the 79 shell casings left at the scene.
Okay, those 79 shell casings are the key to this entire deep dive.
They really are.
The forensic science journal we analyzed details a massive evolution in how crime labs pull DNA off a fired bullet casing. Like 10 years ago, getting DNA off a spent casing was basically a statistical long shot.
Yeah, a 2015 study by the San Diego Police Department showed only a 30% success rate in pulling a usable DNA profile off a casing.
30%, it's so low.
It's terrible. But by 2022, modern forensic methods bumped that success rate up to a staggering 67%.
So what changed in those 7 years? I mean, how are forensic scientists suddenly finding microscopic evidence on a tiny piece of brass?
It starts with the actual mechanics of loading a gun. When someone presses a brass or copper cartridge down into a spring-loaded magazine, there is intense friction between their thumb and the metal.
Right, so they're pressing hard.
Exactly. They leave behind sweat and skin cells. We call this touch DNA.
Touch DNA, got it.
The problem for forensic scientists has always been surviving the violent explosion of the gun firing and surviving the metal itself.
Wait, surviving the metal, are you saying the casing itself attacks the DNA?
Yes. Copper actively degrades DNA.
Really?
Yeah. If a skin cell rests on a copper casing, a biological clock starts ticking. The DNA literally breaks down.
I had no idea metal could do that.
It's a huge problem. Forensic labs changed the game between 2015 and 2022 by developing highly sensitive PCR amplification kits optimized for touch DNA.
Let me stop you there, because PCR gets thrown around a lot in science journals. Give us the simple 8th grade breakdown of what PCR actually does.
Sure. Think of PCR polymerase chain reaction as a molecular photocopier.
Okay, molecular photocopier.
Right. If you only have 2 or 3 degraded skin cells on a casing, that isn't enough material for a scientist to read the genetic barcode.
It's just too small.
Exactly. The PCR process takes that tiny trace of DNA and copies it millions of times over until the sample is large enough to analyze.
That is incredible. But they still have to get those 2 or 3 skin cells off the metal in the first place, right?
Yes. And they use a technique called sonication to do that. They drop the shell casing into a liquid bath and blast it with sound waves.
Sound waves?
Yep. The physical vibration of the sound waves shakes the cellular material loose from the microscopic grooves in the metal.
Wow.
And crucially, that liquid bath is a special rinse solution with chemical additives that specifically stop the copper from degrading the DNA any further.
Okay, so we have molecular photocopiers and sound wave baths. The science in the lab sounds foolproof.
It's very advanced.
But the journal highlights a massive vulnerability, and it isn't happening in the laboratory. It happens at 2:00 in the morning on the street when a patrol officer actually picks up the casing.
Right, because the forensic value of touch DNA is incredibly fragile. The journal notes that simply placing a collected shell casing into a traditional paper evidence envelope or cardboard box causes up to a 56% loss of DNA.
56%.
Yes, and paper envelopes have been standard police procedure for decades.
Losing 56% of your evidence just on the car ride to the lab is mind-blowing. It sounds like trying to lift a single snowflake off a hot sidewalk without melting it.
That's a perfect analogy.
So it's less about the DNA just vanishing and more like using a piece of sandpaper to wipe dust off a jagged piece of metal. The rough paper fibers of the envelope act like sandpaper against the brass casing.
Exactly. As the envelope jostles around in the back of a police cruiser, the paper physically tears the fragile skin cells out of the microscopic grooves.
That is wild.
That is the exact mechanism of loss. But the forensic field engineered a solution.
Okay, what is it?
The journal details a new tool called the case grabber. It is essentially a stainless steel spring tweezer.
A tweezer?
Yeah. An investigator inserts the tweezer inside the hollow, fired end of the casing and grabs it from the inside.
Oh, so they aren't touching the outside at all.
Right. Then they snap a clear protective plastic tube around the outside. The exterior of the casing, where the thumbprint and the DNA actually live, never touches anything during transport. The casing basically flows in the middle of the tube.
Okay, but I am looking at the timeline here, and something does not add up.
What do you mean?
Well, if a science journal publishes this breakthrough in 2022, and we literally have tools like the case grabber to perfectly preserve the evidence, why are defense attorneys in December 2025 still successfully arguing that police are tossing evidence into cardboard boxes?
It's a great question.
I mean, why isn't every cop using a case grabber for a high-profile murder?
You are hitting on the fundamental gap between laboratory science and street-level law enforcement. Science always outpaces procedure.
Oh, I see.
When a forensic breakthrough happens, it doesn't instantly teleport into the trunk of every police cruiser in the country.
Right, right.
Police departments operate on massive, slow-moving municipal budgets, securing funding for new equipment, rewriting the standard operating procedure manuals, and training thousands of patrol officers takes years.
And defense attorneys know exactly how to exploit that lag.
Absolutely.
During the detention hearing, the defense attorney aggressively questioned the lead detective, asking if the 79 casings were collected in a sterile manner to prevent contamination. And the detective actually admitted on the stand he didn't know if sterile collection was the best method.
Yeah. That procedural gap is exactly what defense attorneys look for. When physical evidence like DNA and fingerprints is compromised, missing, or effectively challenged in court, law enforcement loses their scientific anchor.
And when they lose the science, they fall back on their oldest, most potent tool.
The interrogation room.
Right. Which brings us to the Fordham Law Review article. Because the two primary suspects here, Jailen and Kelvin, were both 17 at the time of the shooting.
And the psychology of interrogating a teenager is currently undergoing a massive seismic shift in the legal world.
Because the general public holds a major misconception about what is legal in an interrogation room, right?
Oh, completely. In the vast majority of the United States, it is completely legal for a police officer to lie to a suspect.
They can just fabricate evidence out of thin air?
Yes. They can use verbal misrepresentations to break a suspect. A detective can legally look a teenager in the eye and say, "We found your DNA on the shell casings," even if the lab hasn't even tested them yet.
That is so manipulative.
They can say, "Your friend is in the next room, he flipped on you, and he is signing a confession right now." They also frequently use false promises of leniency, heavily implying that if the suspect just admits it was an accident, they will get a lighter sentence.
And historically, the courts justified this by assuming a rational person isn't going to confess to a murder they didn't commit just because a cop told a lie.
Exactly. The Supreme Court allowed deception under the assumption that an innocent adult will hold their ground. But the Fordham Law Review piece systematically dismantles why applying that adult logic to a teenager creates an absolute disaster.
Because the brains are different.
Entirely different. Neurobiology shows us suspects under the age of 18 are 2 to 3 times more likely to falsely confess under the pressure of deception than adults are.
2 to 3 times is a terrifying statistic when a murder conviction is on the line.
It really is. It comes down to biology. The teenage brain is physically different. The frontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and evaluating future consequences, is not fully developed.
So they literally can't think ahead like we do.
Right. Teenagers are biologically wired to be highly susceptible to authority figures. They are eager to please. Most dangerously, their brains overwhelmingly prioritize immediate relief over long-term consequences.
Okay, let's put us in that room. Because I think a lot of people listening are imagining themselves in that chair thinking, if I know I didn't shoot anyone, I am not confessing to a murder, no matter what lie the detective tells me.
It's a very common thought.
Walk us through the exact psychological breaking point where a teenager's brain calculates that confessing to a violent crime is actually the logical choice.
So it defies adult common sense, but you have to strip away your adult frontal cortex. Imagine you are 16 years old. You have been sitting in a windowless room for 6 hours.
Okay.
You are exhausted. You are terrified. 2 detectives figures of absolute authority who you have been conditioned your entire life to obey are standing over you.
Yeah.
They tell you they have your DNA. They tell you your friend sold you out. You are in a state of sheer sensory overload and panic. The immediate, overwhelming threat to your brain is not a trial a year from now. The threat is the room, the screaming, the pressure.
And then the detective offers the escape hatch.
Yes. The detective softens their voice and says, "Look, I know you aren't a killer. I know it was just a mistake. Just tell me it was an accident, sign this paper, and you can go home."
Wow.
To an adult brain, the long-term consequence of signing a murder confession obviously outweighs the desire to leave the room. But a teenager's brain focuses entirely on the immediate relief of ending the confrontation.
They just want it to stop.
Exactly. They think, I will just tell them what they want to hear so I can escape this room and I'll explain it to my mom and a lawyer tomorrow.
But tomorrow is too late.
Way too late.
The confession is on tape. The Fordham piece notes a confession is universally treated as the most damning piece of evidence possible. It biases the judge, the jury, and the rest of the investigation.
But the legal system is finally starting to recognize this biological reality. The Supreme Court ruled in recent years that children are different. effectively banning the juvenile death penalty and mandatory life without parole for minors.
But the real fight over interrogation deception is happening at the state level right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
In 2021, Illinois became the first state to pass a historic law targeting this exact issue. They created a presumption that juvenile confessions obtained through police deception are inadmissible in court.
Which was huge.
And Oregon passed a similar law that same year. Texas uses a different approach, applying a test to see if the police deception was offensive to due process.
The mechanics of the Illinois law are fascinating because it completely flips the burden of proof.
How so?
Well, before this law, if a teenager falsely confessed because a cop lied, the defense attorney had to move mountains to convince a judge to throw the tape out. Now, the law creates a presumption of inadmissibility.
So basically, the judge assumes the confession is garbage from the jump.
Exactly. If the defense proves the detective knowingly used deception, the confession is presumed invalid. The burden shifts entirely to the prosecutor.
Oh, wow.
The prosecutor now has to prove, by clear and convincing evidence, that the detective's lie did not cause the confession.
Proving a negative like that in a psychological setting has got to be nearly impossible.
It really is. Which effectively forces police departments in those states to completely abandon deceptive tactics when questioning minors.
We started this deep dive with the heartbreaking, senseless loss of a young congressional intern, Eric Tarpinian-Jachym, and the devastating murder of 17-year-old Zoe Kelly. By tracking the fallout of their cases, we exposed the incredibly fragile, high-stakes chain of the justice system.
It's all connected.
It stretches from the intense political pressure to close a high-profile case, to the microscopic science of swabbing a copper shell casing, down to the rough paper fibers of an evidence envelope destroying DNA.
And it ultimately leads right into the intense psychological chess match of interrogating a teenager whose brain is biologically incapable of weighing the consequences of their own words.
You listening to this might never sit on a criminal jury. You might never find yourself sitting across from a detective in an interrogation room.
Hopefully not.
But understanding the friction points of this system makes you a far more critical consumer of the world around you.
Yeah, when you watch a true crime documentary, read a news headline about a high-profile arrest, or listen to a politician demand swift justice, you no longer just see the result. You see the invisible mechanics.
You understand the gap between laboratory science and street-level procedure and the sheer power of psychological pressure.
It changes the way you view the entire machine.
It really does. But there is a final thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
We spent this entire deep dive analyzing the flaws of human investigators. We looked at how a patrol officer's physical hands or choice of an envelope might destroy a microscopic skin cell. We looked at how a detective's inherent biases and the pressure to close a case might lead them to psychologically manipulate a teenager.
The human element is the ultimate variable in the justice system.
So, as artificial intelligence begins to rapidly synthesize and interpret forensic data, could we reach a point in our lifetimes where the human element is removed entirely?
That is a wild thought.
Imagine a future where an impartial AI swarm analyzes a crime scene, perfectly maps the ballistics, and recovers the microscopic DNA without ever dropping it in a paper envelope. Could an algorithm become so precise at determining the absolute truth of a physical environment that we no longer need human detectives to guess?
If the forensic science becomes absolutely perfect, the human investigator might just become obsolete. Could technology completely eliminate human error and effectively end the need for interrogations altogether?
Something to think about the next time you hear a politician promise an open and shut case. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.